Hey everyone, it's Tyler back with another video. This week I'm breaking down probably my most requested topic, which is how I balance running and lifting in the same program. Now this is a big topic, so I'm going to break it apart into 2 weeks, but this week I'm going to be breaking down how I run and lift in the same session, workout by workout, and next week I'm going to break down how I do it long term throughout the season. And the first thing I want to address is that yes, I run and lift in the same session if possible. Obviously, you always can't do that. So even though you may not lift and run in the same session, I still recommend running and lifting on the same day. And there's a reason for this. The goal for my training sessions is to keep my heavy days heavy and to keep my light days light. And so if I split up my running and lifting, I have two options. One option is that I run, then lift, then run, then lift, then run, then lift, then have an off day, and you just run and lift back and forth. The problem with that is that you're always a little bit tired from the previous session. So your runs don't end up being very fresh and don't end up being very good. And your lifting ends up not being very good. On the other hand, you can run, then lift on the next day, and then you can take a day off and be fresh for the run the next day. Here's the problem with that. If you do run, lift off, you've only gotten 2 runs in that week. Whereas the run lift person and the run lift rest person have both gotten 3 or 4 sessions in. And so the real reason that I run and lift in the same session is that I want to make sure that I'm fresh on the days where I'm supposed to run and get as much rest as possible, but it also allows me to get as many high quality running sessions in as possible. And yes, if you run then lift, your lift is going to be a little bit worse. That is kind of inevitable, but that's okay because at the end of the day, my primary goal is running and lifting is more of a secondary thing that supports my running. And a lot of people say, well, what about the interference effect, which everyone's talking about now, hybrid athletes and the interference effect and that you can't do running and lifting. 2 things with that. 1, this is primarily for distance runners because when you run really long distances, it releases hormones in your body that break down tissue, that break down muscle, that liberate fat cells to use for energy. And so those catabolic hormones aren't as present in sprinting. Sprinting is a lot more anabolic and the hormone response is pretty similar to lifting. So in that sense, there really is no interference effect for lifting and sprinting. Now there is a little bit of an interference effect when it comes to fatigue in your nervous system, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later when I break down exercise order. Real quick, if you guys like this kind of content, like the video and subscribe. It helps grow my channel. It helps me get my content out to more people. And if you like this video, everything else on my channel is the same kind of stuff. The first thing I want to talk about is exercise selection. I think a lot of people will say that certain exercises are must-have in the program and they can't ever leave. You have to always be doing some kind of squat, always have to be doing a deadlift. And I think that that's half true. There are certain movements that should never leave the program. Things like hinges, squats, things that are explosive, plyometrics, those are all really important and you need them in your program if you want to keep improving. But the specific exercises that you pick aren't so important. If you don't like a 2-legged barbell back squat, I don't recommend that you do it because I think it makes you more likely to not try as hard, to stray from the program, to skip lifting altogether. But if you like a single leg squat and you think it's more effective, then go ahead and try it. Especially if you're somebody who has really long legs, you get folded up in a squat. I only single leg squat at this point because I find that it works much better for my body. When it comes to explosive movements, I think that cleans are really good. I personally really enjoy them, but I would never tell someone that the clean is the most important movement. You could do something like med ball throws or something else that's explosive that gets your nervous system firing at a high rate that doesn't involve specifically the hang clean or the power clean. When it comes to plyometrics, my only rule is that most of my work should be relatively extensive and a little bit of my work should be intensive. And what this means is that most of my work is easy plyometrics. And then about 30% of my plyometrics, I like to be really intensive, something like a drop into a jump, things that have a really heavy eccentric component where you're landing really hard. I don't like to do a lot of hard landings in one session because I think that can be really heavy on the body. I mean, if you put your mind to it, you can do almost any exercise. The real thing that's going to change is our reps and the weight that we use. If you want to improve your max strength, we want heavy weight and low reps. If you want to increase your explosive power, we want light weight and low reps. So similar to strength, but it's light and you want to move it fast. And if you want to build more tissue, if you want to grow the muscle, you're going to have more volume. And so we're going to have things like medium weight, medium reps, and a high number of sets. So you're doing as much work as you possibly can. There are benefits and downsides to each one, and I recommend doing all of them in a program, and I'll talk more about exercise order later. So aside from the basics, I do like to include what I call fluff work. Just things that aren't as important as the basics, but they might be beneficial, they might be a complete waste of time, and if you need to cut them at the end of the session, that's fine. This might be things like balance stuff on a Bosu ball, really sport-specific movements, and also hypertrophy work and extra core work. I think those are good to do at the end when you're mostly just focused on getting through it and building more volume into the program. The goal with sprinting is to always be challenging our nervous system with something new. And so I think this fluff work category is a great way to find things that might work, that might add benefit. The reason that I include all of this as fluff work is that there's not solid evidence that any of it makes you a substantially better athlete. The one exception to this is hypertrophy work. There is some very good research that having more muscle can increase the amount of power you can put out. But I also think that one, there are trade-offs with gaining too much muscle mass. And two, you can do hypertrophy work when you're tired because you're just trying to add volume, and so your intensity is not as important. And right now, I bet you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of things. How am I going to fit this all into one workout? And in this case, I think that exercise order is everything. So first things first, I like to say, keep the main thing the main thing. Every session I have, if I'm running and lifting, I'm going to run first. And the reason for this is that as you fatigue, your central nervous system has a hard time keeping up with speed, and then you'll lose your strength, and then you'll start to just get muscular fatigue. Any interference effect that you're going to see as a sprinter with lifting is going to be because of central nervous system fatigue. And the best way you can avoid this is just by running first. If you run first and lift second, you're almost never going to see a downside to doing both in the same session or in the same day. Now, there might be a case where you're doing a capacity session and your goal is to be fatigued during your run. If your goal is to be fatigued anyways, I don't see a problem with doing your run second. This isn't a hard and fast rule, but for me, I think it helps put me in a good mental place because from a mental standpoint and from a fatigue standpoint, you're going to get better performance in the thing you do first. And again, if your lifting doesn't go well, or if it's a little bit worse than it would have been, that's okay because the main goal is running. When it comes to general exercise order in the weight room, the goal is always to do the most explosive thing first, all the way down to the least explosive. And the reason for this is just the order of fatigue. Your nervous system is going to fatigue before your actual muscles do. What that means is that you can do all of your really explosive and high strength work first, and then you can do hypertrophy, fluff work, things that you just need to get through. And I'll showcase this in the example workout at the end, but a typical session for me looks like run, explosive lift, strength lift, hypertrophy lift. And because things keep getting less explosive, the fatigue on your nervous system is going to be less of a factor than if you did 10 sets of squats and then tried to do explosive box jumps or tried to run afterwards. And the last thing I want to touch on before breaking down this workout is the total volume. Now, if you Google how many sets per week should I do of each exercise, you're going to find around 10 to 20 sets per muscle group per week. And I think this is an okay number, but I prefer to shoot on the low end of this. And I think this number is fine, it's standardized. If your goal is to maximize strength and muscle growth, I think it's a really good number. The reason is that you can do a lot of sub-maximal work when it comes to lifting, and so fatigue doesn't impact your training as much. The reason for this is that sprinting is very sensitive to fatigue. Because we want to be at such a high intensity, it makes you a lot more sensitive to fatigue from having too much volume. And so I like to shoot on the lower side of these volume recommendations year-round. Now, I'm going to cover more about volume in the next video because I think it matters across an entire season when you have more volume and when you have more intensity. I can't give you an exact volume recommendation because how quickly you recover is going to depend on you as an individual, how much stress you're putting on your body in your training, and the level of performance that you're trying to achieve. Your general rule of thumb should be one, that you're doing enough volume that you're improving from week to week. If you find yourself consistently failing at the same level of weight, you probably need to add more sets. But if you find yourself completely exhausted for more than about 2 days after your workout, if you work out on Monday and you're not ready to go again on Wednesday, you've probably overdone it a little bit. And so to show you how all of this works, I'm gonna break down my workout from Monday. The first thing I did was I warmed up and did some drills. Obviously that's really important. And then I got straight into my run. I did 2 150s and then 4 60-meter runs. Then I had a little bit of a longer break and I did 2 sets of a 150, 30-second rest and a 120. And then I did 4 60s. And this running workout did 2 things. On one hand, it gave me some endurance type reps. It let me get some of that conditioning in that I haven't had as much of since my injury. And I also wanted some high intensity, shorter stuff so that I can continue to build in intensity and ramp that speed up. And once I was done with that, I moved straight into my lift. I did 3 sets of cleans and I did 3 reps of each. And the goal with these cleans is, again, low number of reps. I'm only doing 3 reps in each set and I only did 3 sets, but the goal is to move it as explosive as possible. After that, I moved straight into a heavy single leg squat. And this is a lot slower of a movement. There's still a lot of intensity, but the speed aspect is gone. I'm mostly just worried about how much weight I can lift. And because it's a single leg squat, the weight isn't as high as it would be with a double leg squat, but you have to understand that it's on one leg. So even though the weight might look lower, it's still a relatively heavy set because it's something I could only do for 3 to 5 reps. And it was slower in terms of the speed of the bar. After that, I went into a Nordic hamstring curl, which is still a pretty heavy and intense exercise that you want to be somewhat fresh for. And I paired that with a hip flexor raise using the kettlebell. Now, these are both still difficult exercises. I'm not saying that the exercises later are easy, but they're not as heavy as the single leg squat, and the speed doesn't matter at all. And after that, I finished up with some hypertrophy work. Core circuit, I went over to one of the hamstring machines, and I just built in more volume to the program. And I couldn't even tell you what the weight I did was. And the goal here isn't to make sure that I'm hitting PRs on the hamstring curl machine. It's just to build more volume in, to build up that tissue so that I can continue to get stronger in the long run. Thank you guys for sticking around for such a long video. As always, I appreciate it. Thank you for all the support you've shown the channel, and I'll see you guys next week.